Hello, dreamers of distant ages, and welcome to Moonlight Science, where we wander gently through the half-lit corridors of history and let curiosity be our lantern. Tonight, we slip quietly into one of humanity's most haunting mysteries: the possibility that we are not the first advanced civilization to rise upon this planet. Beneath jungles, deserts, and seafloors lie traces that whisper of forgotten builders. Megaliths aligned to vanished stars, artifacts that seem to predate known empires, myths that may be memories rather than imagination. This journey is not about conspiracy, but curiosity. About listening to the Earth's hidden archive and asking whether we've overlooked entire chapters of our own story. Settle in, let the noise of the world fade, and together, under the calm glow of distant moons, let's uncover the evidence we keep ignoring. To understand how easily history can vanish, we first have to let go of the comforting idea that time is tidy. We like to picture human progress as a clean line: prehistoric caves giving way to pyramids, pyramids yielding to printing presses, and printing presses humming toward the digital dawn. Yet the Earth, patient and temperamental, does not draw straight lines. It erases, rewrites, and sometimes throws the book into the sea. If our planet had a library, most of its shelves would be blank. Rock strata are its pages, each one compressed from mud and memory. But gaps yawn between them, missing chapters where entire epochs have been scraped away by glaciers, drowned by oceans, or melted into magma. In geological terms, time is not a scroll rolled neatly from beginning to end. It is a crumbling mosaic whose pieces we keep trying to fit together, while half of them are lost beneath the couch cushions of prehistory. Consider what even a modest earthquake can do. A few seconds of violence, and roads buckle, dams collapse, homes vanish into fracture. Now multiply that power by 1,000. Stretch it across centuries, and imagine continents grinding themselves into dust while seas roll in to claim the rubble. In that theater of destruction, what trace could any civilization hope to leave? Metal corrodes, glass powders to sand, and the proudest architecture melts into anonymous silt. Within 1,000,000 years, even the tallest skyscraper would be nothing more than a glimmer of mineral out of place, a curiosity inside a cliff face. This is the unsettling reality. The geological record is not a film reel of continuous history. It is a heavily edited trailer, with most scenes cut. Between the preserved layers hiding under our feet lie voids spanning tens of millions of years, time we can scarcely account for. We call this phenomenon deep time amnesia. And it raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if consciousness, the spark we believe unique to our species, has ignited before, only to be snuffed out so completely the crust had to start the story over? We already know nature resets itself regularly. Catastrophes have struck like an unkind metronome. The Permian episode that obliterated 9 out of 10 marine species, the volcanic cataclysms that cloaked daylight in ash, the meteorite that ended the dinosaur supremacy. Each time, life staggered, but found a new melody. These are the great punctuation marks in Earth's biography, dramatic pauses that allow evolution to change instruments. If evolution itself can reboot, could civilization, the organized expression of intelligence, not also rise, fall, and vanish within such intervals? When scientists dig through the deep layers of sediment, they sometimes stumble across anomalies, lumps of metal embedded where only stone should be, geometric markings in formations millions of years older than the first known humans, isotopic residues that hint at combustion, at industry, long before humanity began shaping copper. Most turn out to be natural oddities, the planet's talent for coincidence. Yet every so often, one remains unresolved, a whisper that seems to repeat the same provocation. Are you sure you are the first? Our estimates of what counts as ancient are arrogant. Civilized humanity measures itself in 10,000-year increments. Yet Earth is 4.5 billion years old. We are a flicker in that darkness, a spark that has barely warmed the air. If another intelligence had flourished even 50 million years earlier, the odds of finding its relics intact approach impossibility. Continental drift would have swallowed its cities, volcanic renewal would have forged fresh crust, and ice ages would have sanded the bones of its machinery down to mere ore, the raw material for future civilizations to rediscover. It is humbling to picture that unseen cycle. There could have been other ages of reason, moments when minds looked up at the same moon and wondered about permanence, only to be folded back into stone by the very planet that gave them rise. This is not myth-making, but mathematics. Given enough time, probability itself begins to favor repetition. Consciousness might be less a singular miracle, more a recurring experiment. Perhaps the Earth dreams of intelligence the way a tree dreams of fruit, seasonally. The forgotten timeline, then, is not simply about lost artifacts. It is about perspective. We live atop a world that constantly rebuilds its skin, and we assume the past ends where our imagination does. Yet the rocks whisper otherwise. They hint that beneath every ruin lies the shadow of an older one. And beneath every story we tell about beginnings, there might be another prelude buried too deep to dig. Our timeline is a candle in a cave, bright but brief, surrounded by the vast, unlit halls of forgotten ages. Before there was writing, there were stories. Around firelight, under caves painted with ochre and smoke, our ancestors turned fear into poetry and memory into legend. For them, myth was not entertainment. It was storage. Every monster, every flood, every god hurling lightning was also information, encoded in imagery vivid enough to outlast stone tablets. If deep-time civilizations once rose and fell, their faintest echoes might not lie in metal or ruins, but in the stories that refused to die. Consider how strangely alike those stories are. In Mesopotamia, the god Enlil sends rain for days and nights until even the mountains drown, sparing only a single boat of survivors. Half a world away, the Hopi tell of worlds destroyed by fire, then flood, with chosen people emerging from the caves to start anew. Pacific Islanders speak of a sea that swallowed their ancestors' homeland. The Norse remembered a deluge of blood and water at the world's rebirth. Over and over, the same pattern surfaces. Water rising, fire falling, darkness swallowing light. Coincidence can explain a few similar tales. It struggles to explain thousands. Science has begun to translate myths' metaphors back into events. Geological cores show ash layers from volcanic winters. Ice samples reveal years when atmospheric dust blocked the sun. Coastal sediments mark sudden surges of salt water consistent with ancient tsunamis and post-glacial sea level rise. Each discovery sounds suspiciously like a moral fable come true. What we once dismissed as imagination is starting to resemble eyewitness journalism written in verse. The power of myth lies in its portability. A story can cross generations faster than DNA and farther than migrations. It can encode coordinates and warnings without naming them. Take the Aboriginal tales of Australia's coastlines, describing reefs and bays that, according to modern mapping, lay dry more than 10,000 years ago. The stories remember geography that only an Ice Age eye could have seen. In a sense, those myths are unbroken time capsules, oral atlases drawn before maps existed. Then there is the persistence of celestial disaster. Many traditions speak of fire in the sky or serpents twisting through heaven before catastrophe. The Chinese tell of Gong Gong, striking a mountain and tilting the sky. The Mayan Popol Vuh describes stones that burned from the sky. The ancient Egyptians wrote of a day when the sun turned away. Modern astronomy points to impacts, near misses, and meteor showers at intervals that align eerily with those old accounts. When myth and crater maps shake hands across epochs, the effect is unsettling. Yet human memory is not perfect tape, it is song. What begins as a fact becomes rhythm, and rhythm outlives language. Maybe that is why the oldest stories speak with the voice of wind and water, describing the same planetary moods we still fear. Myth allows emotion to carry data more securely than numbers ever could. You may forget the date of a flood, but you will remember a god's wrath for generations. You will build your house just a little higher next time. For those searching traces of lost civilizations, myth is not proof, but it is direction. It points our gaze toward landscapes where stories converge. When separate cultures describe the same drowned lands or vanished suns, perhaps we are not hearing global imagination, but global memory bleeding through. If knowledge once fell with the rains or burned with falling stars, stories became arcs, ferrying fragments across the deluge of forgetfulness. We may never uncover a definitive artifact declaring, "We were here before you." But in the persistence of myth, across languages, continents, and extinctions, something whispers continuity. The tales of floods and sky fire might be the planet's way of keeping its diary in our tongues, ensuring that when the next storm comes, someone will still remember what water can do. And so the voices of the past hum beneath our own. They tell us not to mistake myth for fiction, nor science for certainty. Somewhere between them flows the true current of memory, carrying knowledge older than writing and perhaps older than our species itself. When we listen with care, we are not just hearing stories of gods and heroes. We are rediscovering the archives of Earth's earliest historians, those anonymous survivors who turned survival into song. Archaeology, for all its discipline and wonder, is still a science of what remains rather than what was. It studies a fraction of 1% of humanity's possible footprints, the sparse scatter of tools and walls that luck, geology, and patience have spared from decay. The rest has been folded neatly away by Earth's restless hands. Every time we celebrate a discovery as monumental, it is worth remembering how accidental it is. The past survives only where the planet momentarily forgot to clean up after itself. The ground we walk upon is not solid history. It is a restless quilt of shifting plates, rivers that wander, seas that rise and retreat like breathing lungs. 70% of human settlement, if it followed the water as our species always does, would now lie under ocean and estuary. Yet our archaeology is largely continental, focused on the dry and the durable. We excavate what the waves have not claimed, and so our picture of prehistory is necessarily landlocked, a biased diary missing most of its pages. Doggerland, that drowned plain linking Britain to continental Europe, haunts this blind spot. Once a wide expanse of rivers and forests where mammoths roamed and humans camped by freshwater lakes, it now sleeps beneath the cold green waters of the North Sea. Trawlers occasionally drag up spear points, bones, and even fragments of peat that still smell faintly of vegetation 10,000 years gone. For decades, geologists assumed nothing of importance lay there. Only recently have sonar maps revealed entire ancient river valleys winding through the seabed, ghost landscapes frozen beneath the tides. Doggerland is a reminder that every coastline we see is temporary. every map a snapshot before the next inhalation of the sea. A continent, away, off India's western shore. Sonar images revealed streets and structures beneath layers of silt near modern Dwarka. Debate still rages about what these formations mean: natural reefs, medieval ruins, or something far older. What matters more than age is what their existence implies. That human cities do not vanish merely by crumble, they sink. A modest rise in sea level can hide centuries of culture beneath meters of sediment. Multiply that by the constant heave of tectonic plates, and it becomes astonishing that we have found any coherent record at all. Our tools for reading time, radiocarbon, luminescence, isotopic analysis, are only as accurate as the samples nature allows us. When strata fold, when soil is recycled by volcanic fire, when ancient carbon mixes with newer life, the clock resets itself. Rocks and sediments can lie, not intentionally, but persuasively. A pottery shard reworked into younger earth may appear thousands of years fresher than it really is. Conversely, contamination can thrust simple hearth charcoal so far backward in the timeline that it masquerades as evidence of impossibly early culture. Dating, in the end, is interpretation layered upon chance. Because we cannot easily dig through oceans or continents, we subconsciously confine civilization to the scene we can reach: deserts, river valleys, and timeless plateaus. Yet the evidence of drowned cities, shifting rivers, and vanished coasts whispers that we are staring at a mural missing most of its paint. If all of modern humanity's creations ended tomorrow, within 1,000,000 years, only fragments of skyscraper foundations would exist, perhaps buried inside future cliffs. If aliens dug then, they too would assume their sample, the bits they happened to find, told the full story. The Earth practices selective memory. It buries what it wishes to forget and keeps only enough faint reminders to make us wonder. When waves covered Doggerland, when Dwarka's stones fell into the tide, the record of those lives turned fluid, slipping far beyond the reach of shovels. What we cling to as the sum of human history may be little more than what the sea has not yet reclaimed. In that realization lies both humility and mystery. The deeper we dig, the more we learn not of lost empires alone, but of the planet's reluctance to preserve them. Ours is an archaeology of survivors, not of all who ever lived. And somewhere, beneath salt water and shifting crust, the true library of Earth's civilizations, known and forgotten alike, waits patiently, sealed by the quiet weight of sand and time. If the Earth keeps its secrets anywhere, it is beneath the waves. More than 2/3 of our planet lies hidden under water so deep that sunlight cannot reach. Down there, pressure crushes steel, and time itself seems to move differently. Currents polish wreckage into anonymity. Sand buries memory grain by grain. Yet in that silence, the ocean is not only a destroyer, it is also the most faithful archivist the world has ever known. What falls into its grasp is lost to us, but not to the planet. The seabed becomes a sealed library, unreadable but intact. Every coastline we know is temporary. The ocean has always moved, swallowing miles of land, retreating again, leaving ghost shorelines carved into cliffs and continental shelves. Along those drowned edges still lie the footprints of vanished worlds, the homes, harbors, and fields of people whose horizons vanished in a single generational gasp. Beneath the Mediterranean, sonar reveals stair-like terraces stretching where ancient beaches once touched the sun. Off the coasts of Cuba and Japan, geometric ridges and right-angled walls appear in deep scans, too precise for comfort, too eroded for certainty. Scientists debate whether these are natural formations, limestone shaped by current and chemistry, or the softened bones of forgotten cities. Time erases distinction. At great depth, architecture and geology share the same posture. The ocean's patience is infinite. A shipwreck decays in decades, but the stones of a port can endure for millennia beneath quiet silt. Oxygen is the great eater of history. Remove it, and preservation blossoms. Ancient wood hardened by minerals waits whole in anoxic mud. Amphorae keep their graceful curves. Even long-dead seeds sometimes cling to life's potential. The sea buries its dead with astonishing care. That paradox, its ability to both conceal and conserve, is why many researchers now call the continental shelves our blue archives. Somewhere beneath that rolling vault may rest the missing chapters of civilization, fathoms below what we dare to touch. And yet, exploration inches forward. Remote submersibles, humming like mechanical whales, glide over continental slopes, gathering images the human eye has never seen. In the Arabian Sea, divers have brushed dust from what appear to be paved streets. In the Adriatic, cameras encountered what looks like orderly stone blocks descending into darkness, hinting at coastlines that stood dry before the last ice age melted away. Each photograph is grainy, ambiguous, a canvas of suggestion on which imagination easily paints empires. But imagination, tempered with science, has uncovered real miracles before. For the ocean changes slowly, but it never forgets entirely. Coral reefs colonize stone regardless of who laid it, building cathedrals on top of cathedrals. When acids and currents finally grind human handiwork into sand, chemical fingerprints still linger. Strange mineral ratios, traces of metal once refined in furnaces now lost. Oceanographers studying sediment cores sometimes find such anomalies. Microscopic scars of heat or alloy, drifting between natural layers like punctuation marks, asking questions no one can answer. To walk along a modern shore and look out at that vast blue calm is to face a mirror that refuses to return our gaze. The surface hides everything. Beneath it lie not just shipwrecks and cargo, but the unrecorded histories of countless generations who built too close to the edge of changing seas. We have only begun to listen, sending sonar pings into darkness and receiving echo maps that sketch the outlines of riddles older than writing. If myths remembered floods and archaeology reveals the gaps, then the oceans are where those two languages finally merge. Beneath the hush of the waves sleeps an archive of wanderers, builders, and dreamers whose songs the planet has recorded in pressure and salt. Someday, when technology learns to read that slow script in full, we may find that our ancestors' lost continents weren't metaphors at all. Merely forgotten addresses filed safely away in the sea's silent vault. Across the world, colossal stones rise from the earth like punctuation marks in an ancient sentence no one remembers how to read. They jut out of jungles, cling to mountaintops, or lie half-buried in deserts where wind carves them smooth again. Every culture that encounters such megaliths claims them with a story, made by gods, giants, or heroes. But their real origin remains more elusive. The question lingers in the silence around them. How did early builders, armed only with copper, rope, and patience, move and shape material that challenges even modern machinery? At Baalbek in Lebanon, 3 immense blocks known as the Trilithon sit fitted within a temple platform weighing roughly 1,000 tons each, with a 4th, unfinished, still lying in its quarry, surpassing even that. Archaeologists propose ingenious but uncertain methods. Wooden rollers, sand ramps, teams of thousands. The theories work on parchment, but not always on physics. A single block outweighs any truck or crane humanity could operate until recent decades. The stones are not just heavy. They are precise, slotted so tightly you cannot slip a razor between them. Standing before them, one senses not primitive triumph, but a calculated confidence we cannot yet reproduce. Half a world away in the Andean highlands, the walls of Sacsayhuaman curve like frozen waves of stone, each block uniquely shaped to interlock with its neighbor, as though the builders used clay instead of andesite. A rock harder than granite. There are no tool marks, no mortar, and no straight seams. Only perfect fits. The Inca credited these works to their distant ancestors, people of great power. Some researchers suggest heating and softening stone through chemistry. Others propose long-lost alloys of bronze capable of cutting rock as diamond tools do today. Whatever the method, it lies outside the manual we currently possess. Geology adds another layer of strangeness. Many megaliths show surface vitrification, the slight glassy sheen that forms when stone has been exposed to intense heat. Was that weathering, deliberate treatment, or coincidence? Even the most cautious labs admit they do not fully understand how such textures appeared naturally in so many unrelated sites. The recurring pattern whispers of shared experimentation, perhaps even inherited techniques passed down through oral memory long before recorded history stitched its first dates. None of this proves forgotten super technologies or alien assistance. Those are comforting shortcuts when the puzzle feels too large. The more grounded mystery is subtler and perhaps more profound. Knowledge itself is migratory. It drifts across ages like pollen. A discovery doesn't need to stay continuous in written form to reappear. A mason learns by doing, by watching shadows on stone and feeling vibration through the chisel. If a civilization ended but a handful of artisans survived, their hands alone could carry techniques centuries forward. That continuity might look miraculous to future archaeologists when the written record has failed. Yet it is simply memory expressed through craft. Examining these monuments with instruments and drones, we find patterns that imply geometry, astronomy, even acoustics woven into their design. Frequencies resonate at particular spaces inside the stones, suggesting builders understood how vibration travels through solid matter. Whether used for ceremony or for structural stability, it reveals perception on a scale easily underestimated. To call these people primitive is more a confession of modern arrogance than of their limitations. There is serenity in stone that wood or clay cannot match. It outlasts its makers, endures every storm, and keeps its secrets with grace. Each block, whether resting in Baalbek's sunlight or in the thin air above Cusco, stands as testimony that human curiosity has been reaching toward mastery far longer than our textbooks allow. Perhaps our ancestors did not invent their genius. Perhaps they were remembering. In every flawlessly joined edge lies the hint of inheritance, the echo of teachers forgotten but not entirely lost. A lineage of understanding written not in words, but in weight, precision, and silence. Long before telescopes and satellites, our ancestors turned their gaze upward and built with the sky in mind. The evidence stands immovable, carved into limestone, basalt, and sandstone. Structures whose alignments mirror the heavens with uncanny precision. Across continents, civilizations that never shared a ship or script nonetheless followed the same cosmic blueprint. Patterns of solstice, lunar rhythm, and star precession are inscribed in the heavy bones of the earth, suggesting that behind the work of bare hands lay a mind steeped in geometry, astronomy, and a reverence for cosmic order. At Giza, the Great Pyramid's angles match cardinal directions with an accuracy modern surveyors still admire. Its sides deviate from true north by less than a fraction of a degree. Running parallel through time, the ancient builders oriented not for aesthetics, but for purpose, their monument working as both tomb and instrument. Scholars debate whether its alignment recorded stellar risings or helped predict the cyclical flooding of the Nile. Still, when the northern sky was dominated by a different pole star, these masons could chart its slow drift, revealing knowledge not just of space, but of the 26,000-year precession of Earth's axis. How could such a cycle have been recognized without generations of recorded observation far older than the pyramid itself? Stonehenge, standing beneath England's grey winds, echoes the same precision. Its colossal lintels frame the midsummer sunrise and winter sunset to the minute, their shadows marking time like the hands of a celestial clock. Archaeology tells us it was arranged in stages over centuries, suggesting each generation adjusted the stones as if calibrating an instrument. Those adjustments imply a consistent awareness of celestial change, a memory passed down through eyes, charts, and ritual chant long before writing pinned it to papyrus. To build Stonehenge was to build an equation in stone, a function tracing the motion of heaven against the patience of granite. Teotihuacan in Mexico extends the conversation on an urban scale. The Avenue of the Dead tilts 15.5 degrees east of north, a deviation that aligns with the setting of the Pleiades on certain ritual dates. Pyramid platforms measure in ratios echoing planetary orbits and the harmonic intervals of the year's divisions. The plan reads less like a city map and more like a star chart walked upon. To the builders, the cosmos was not distant. It was blueprint and heartbeat both. Measurements encoded in architecture weren't coincidence, but instruction, a reminder of the rhythm governing agriculture, ritual, and resurrection alike. Skeptics argue that given enough monuments, some will inevitably resemble cosmic order by chance. Human pattern seeking is relentless, but coincidence lacks consistency. And here we find global repetition. Egyptian, Mayan, Sumerian, and Polynesian builders drew equal triangles from stellar reference points, each fixing heaven's story into stone independently, yet with the same outcome. Such coordination suggests inherited methodology, a scientific lingua franca without a written tongue. Perhaps it was the remains of an older tradition, knowledge hoarded through calamity, memorized and encoded in myth, then reborn as architecture once survival allowed. Catastrophe erases villages, not ideas whispered from master to apprentice. When the night sky turns above us today, we can look at those same constellations and feel a peculiar kinship. We too measure angles and chart trajectories, only with silicon and glass instead of string and stake. Their mathematics and ours differ in notation, but not in essence. What they carved, we compute. What they worshipped, we orbit. It is humbling to imagine that the first scientists may have stood barefoot on temple floors, counting shadows and listening to the universe speak through repetition. These monuments endure because the laws they obey, the same geometry binding planet and star, have not changed. The forgotten engineers built not for empire or ego alone, but to align themselves with certainty in a changing world. If their civilization was wiped away by time, their equations survived in stone, immutable reminders that once, deep in antiquity, humanity grasped the machinery of the cosmos and recorded it with chisel, compass, and awe. The rhythm of the heavens has always shaped the rhythm of life on Earth, and sometimes those rhythms collide. Around 2,800 years ago, a pulse of sudden fire appears in the geological record, a scar spread across continents. In that narrow band of soil, scientists find tiny black spheres of carbon, melt glass fused from sand, and nano-diamonds born in heat beyond volcanoes. Something immense happened then. Something violent enough to halt an age and begin another. The serene ice of the late Pleistocene cracked into chaos, and humanity, just starting to sow roots and stories, found its world burned clean. For centuries, this event hid in plain sight, its evidence scattered across fields and riverbeds. It was only when modern geologists began noticing the same layer of charred residue from North America to the Middle East, from Chile to Greenland, that a pattern emerged. It pointed to the aftermath of impact rather than eruption. The culprit was likely a shattered comet, a celestial wanderer breaking apart as it brushed too close to the sun. Its fragments rained through Earth's atmosphere, detonating with incandescent fury above forests and ice sheets alike. The shock waves ignited trees by the million, filled the air with soot, and changed the color of daylight. The planet's response was swift and merciless. Temperatures plunged, ocean currents shifted, and a brief return to glacial cold gripped the world. The Younger Dryas, as we now call it, marked a sudden reversal after millennia of warming, a buck's 200-year winter written in ice cores and pollen. Whatever stability early humans had begun to taste was torn away. Whatever proto-civilizations may have sprouted near coasts or river deltas would have watched their harvests vanish beneath frost and famine. In a single cosmic blink, progress reset itself. Archaeology stands uneasily on this border. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built almost on the heels of that catastrophe, seem to rise from its ashes. Megalithic artistry appearing fully developed, as though memory, not invention, guided the hands that raised those stones. Some interpret this as cultural rebirth, a reassembling of scattered knowledge after a near extinction. Others see it as coincidence, a creative spark born precisely because of catastrophe. Either way, the impact carved a dividing line between myth and geology, between the world that was and the one that stumbled forth from the smoke. The planet still carries the bruise. Beneath Greenland's ice sheet, radar mapping reveals a circular depression 90-plus kilometers wide, an impact crater cloaked in frozen time. Across North America, layers of platinum, an element common in asteroids, appear exactly where the soot layer rests. These clues whisper of cosmic debris still smoldering in our DNA, reminders that the universe is not a gentle neighbor. Even as humans began harvesting grains and building hearths, the sky above remained unpredictable, able to erase in seconds what took millennia to dream. Yet tragedy often leaves strange gifts. The cold spell that followed forced migration, adaptation, and cooperation on scales humanity had never known. Fishing communities sprang up along the Mediterranean and Asian shores as land routes failed. New technologies of tool-making and food storage spread. The shock of survival may have been the crucible in which civilization's resilience was first tempered. Out of falling fire came the stubborn desire to endure. And perhaps a deep subconscious memory of loss that seeded our endless curiosity about the heavens. When we look at the night sky now, every streak of light still hums with that ancient warning. It is the whisper of the Younger Dryas across infinity. What falls from above can ignite forests, freeze oceans, and rewrite destiny. Yet it also reminds us that from disaster, new worlds emerge, and from the ashes of old knowledge, new understanding is born. The Earth has always been both classroom and test, teaching with cataclysmic lessons, leaving in its quiet layers a radiant truth. The sky itself is part of our history, sometimes giver of wonder, sometimes the hand that resets the clock. For over 2,000 years, The name Atlantis has shimmered like a mirage, hovering between memory and imagination. Plato was its first chronicler, writing of an island kingdom beyond the pillars of Heracles, a place of radiant wealth and wisdom that vanished beneath the waves in a single day and night of misfortune. To philosophers, it was a parable about pride. To dreamers and explorers, it was a map to something lost. Its shadow stretches through history, refusing to fade, as though some echo inside us insists the story was never purely invention. Strip away the legend's drama, and a quieter possibility emerges. That Plato's tale was an heirloom of survival, the retelling of a real inundation remembered long after its coasts were gone. When he described a civilization swallowed by the sea thousands of years before his time, he may have been echoing ancestral accounts of the floods that closed the Ice Age, when melting glaciers raised oceans by more than 100 meters and devoured continental shelves worldwide. For the people who lived through it, the transformation must have looked like divine punishment. Lands dissolving, temples vanishing into the horizon, whole populations forced inland. In that context, Atlantis is less a moral fable than a memory with details exaggerated by distance. Along the Moroccan coast, ruins older than recorded dynasties lie half-buried in sediments that once marked fertile valleys. Off the Iberian Shelf, sonar has traced symmetrical ridges and circular formations suggestive of construction, though time and tides disguise geometry's origins. The Azores, standing like stepping stones across the Atlantic, bear marine terraces high above current sea levels, signifying islands once broader and lower before the rising sea trimmed them down. Each clue is ambiguous, but together they hum with the resonance of a shared remembrance. That somewhere in deep prehistory, humanity learned how easily paradise can drown. Even Antarctica joins the chorus, frozen and aloof, yet geologically inscribed with an oceanic past. Core samples reveal it was not always a sealed wilderness, but once harbored temperate coasts. To ancient storytellers tracing lost lands to the far south, this glacial giant could have been the final repository of drowned memory, a symbol of a world replaced by ice after the sky fell fiery and the seas rose in rage. The persistence of the Atlantis myth across cultures suggests it struck a nerve deeper than curiosity. Nearly every civilization carries its own version of a golden age ended by cataclysm. Sumerians spoke of Eridu sinking beneath floods. The Hindus remembered Dwarka disappearing under advancing waves. Mesoamerican legends tell of shining islands to the east, now lying beneath the horizon. Perhaps storytellers from scattered survivors all sought to frame the same trauma. The moment humanity realized that the world could betray its own ground. Modern scientists, equipped with sonar, ice cores, and carbon dating, approach these vestiges with measured caution. Yet even they acknowledge that the end of the Pleistocene was an apocalypse of rising seas. Over 2,000 coastal regions were transformed within a few millennia. Enough time for memory to seed myth, but too long for archaeology to preserve simple proof. Worlds slipped beneath the continental shelves where daylight cannot reach, taking their libraries and cities with them, leaving only stories adrift across time. That is why Atlantis endures. It is not merely a lost island. It is humanity's collective phantom limb, a reminder of lands once connected to our sense of wholeness. To dream of it is to feel the ache of something real we cannot retrieve, a spiritual continental shelf lying just below thought. Whether Plato recorded rumor or revelation, his words captured an eternal lesson carried in salt and sorrow, that the sea remembers everything we forget. Each wave that breaks against our modern shores still whispers a fragment of that first global ghost story, murmuring not of empire and hubris, but of remembrance. and of a horizon forever closing over yesterday's home. The maps of our world lie to us, not deliberately, but by omission. The Sahara, stretching from the Atlantic to the Red Sea, seems eternal, an ocean of dunes, a vast silence broken only by wind. Yet satellite eyes peering through that sand reveal another story completely. Channels of extinct rivers winding thousands of kilometers beneath the surface, dry deltas now invisible to human sight, and traces of lake beds large enough to rival entire countries. Beneath the hot stillness hides the ghost of a green world, one that may have sheltered civilizations forgotten long before the first pharaoh raised a monument on the Nile. Radar imaging has traced the outlines of vanished waterways connecting what are now isolated basins. They once ran with the annual pulse of monsoons, feeding grasslands and forests. Fossil evidence tells of elephants, crocodiles, and fish, painting a picture of abundance that clashes with our image of desolation. In some regions, archaeologists have uncovered tools and pottery resting under meters of sand, objects that belonged to people who hunted, built dwellings, and eventually disappeared as the rains withdrew. Tracing these finds, scientists describe a Sahara that breathed, fertile for tens of thousands of years, then drying, then greening again, in step with the grand rhythm of Earth's orbital cycles. Each climate swing rewrote human geography, erasing one chapter, then inviting the next. What if one of those lost green epochs carried not only herders and nomads, but organized societies that rose with the rivers and fell with the drought? It requires only a single generation of wind to bury stone. Cities could vanish within our lifetimes. A few millennia of shifting dunes could hide entire cultures. Unlike in temperate lands, where erosion slowly gnaws away the record, the desert embalms what it takes, wrapping its secrets in silence. Each sandstorm is both destroyer and archivist, scouring monuments smooth, then sealing them from the sun for ages to come. In the central Sahara, the Tassili Najjer Plateau and nearby caves preserve painted walls alive with color, scenes of cattle herds, dancers, and rivers lined with lotus blossoms. The art is meticulous, too detailed to be idle decoration. It feels documentary, like pages torn from a diary of rain. Across thousands of panels, the animals evolve, changing with the climate. Hippos fade from the palette as the desert intrudes. Camels replace them in later strokes. Through pigment alone, we witness the slow exodus of water, the heartbreak of a land watching itself turn to dust. Satellite data from the last few decades adds a spectral complement to this art. Beneath the dunes of eastern Libya runs a colossal buried channel, the Kufra River, its course marked by ancient sediment fans that now supply aquifers tapped for modern irrigation. Elsewhere, radar reveals the Tamanrasset, a massive Pleistocene river system whose branches once drained waters from the Atlas Mountains straight into the Atlantic. During wetter ages, its valley may have supported settlements as rich as those along the Nile, now entirely engulfed by sand. Even the Nile itself shows signs of migration, a great ancestor channel, the Mega-Chad drainage, that once fed gigantic inland lakes. Under those dry basins lie sediments carrying not just reeds and shells, but carbon signatures hinting at dense vegetation, perhaps cultivated plants. Imagining life along those lost rivers feels like recalling a dream. Stone villages mirrored in calm water, fields of sorghum bending with wind, merchants navigating by stars across grass-covered plains that no longer exist. When the monsoon shifted southward and the climate flipped, the inhabitants would have been forced to follow the retreating rainfall, abandoning homes to the encroaching dunes. They became wanderers again, carrying fragments of memory, the taste of fresh water, the sound of a once living river, into legends that would one day be mistaken for myth. Every horizon of sand might therefore hide a buried valley, every ripple a hint of movement frozen mid-gesture. The desert is not empty. It is a locked vault of landscapes, a silent record of boom and collapse stretching across geological time. It tells us that the boundaries of civilization are written in water, and that where we see wasteland, Earth may remember gardens. The jungle breathes differently from the desert, but it guards its secrets with equal devotion. Where sand hides through dryness, the forest hides through abundance. Life piles upon life until stone itself becomes part of the vegetation, every wall wrapped in roots, every avenue smothered in leaves. What once was civilization becomes compost, graciously folded back into green. Only within the past few decades have our eyes grown sharp enough to see through the canopy, to peel back the skin of foliage and glimpse the forgotten geometry beneath. In Guatemala, light pulses from aircraft, LiDAR, or light detection and ranging, have rewritten history in a sweep of invisible beams. They strike the treetops, then the ground below, mapping contours that human explorers could never trace on foot. What looked like scattered ruins of a few cities suddenly emerged as a continent of habitation. Vast, interconnected networks of roads, causeways, terraces, and plazas stretching across lowland jungle for hundreds of miles. Where scholars once counted a few million Maya inhabitants, the numbers now swell by an order of magnitude. Entire metropolitan regions lay hidden not by time alone, but by the exuberance of nature itself. In Cambodia, the same technology revealed the ghost capital of Mahendraparvata, a city older than Angkor, yet swallowed so wholly by rainforest that even its mountain platform had become a maze of trees. Roads, reservoirs, and grid-like suburbs appeared on digital maps as glowing outlines, smooth and deliberate. Standing on the actual ground, one sees only roots and vines. The jungle's camouflage is perfect because it does not merely cover, it absorbs. Lichens digest paint. Fig trees cradle sculptures in woody arms. Soil creeps over the thresholds of temples until they are indistinguishable from hills. The forest converts architecture into topography. This partnership between ruin and growth invites reflection on the transient nature of visibility. Countless explorers had walked over the very spaces where entire cities lay concealed, seeing nothing but foliage. The lesson stings. Invisibility is often a matter of perspective, of patience, of available instruments. What other societies rest undiscovered under Amazonian canopy, under the dripping green vales of Africa's Congo, or beneath the mists of New Guinea's high valleys. Each forest could be holding a mirror to humanity's forgotten past, waiting for a pulse of light to awaken it. So much of our understanding depends on where we choose to look and how we choose to see. The forest does not lie. It simply redefines boundaries. A vine becomes a column, a termite mound mimics an altar, a hillock hides a pyramid. The jungle erases arrogance elegantly. It covers kings and farmers without preference, erodes hierarchy until all return to the same hush of humidity. Archaeologists who step into that hush often describe an uncanny feeling, a sense that civilization never truly vanished here, merely changed disguise. The trees are archivists, not vandals. What LiDAR and similar eyes reveal is the humility of discovery. Technology extends perception, but the wonder it uncovers has been there all along. Every laser pulse tracing the outline of an ancient avenue is really an act of confession, admitting that humanity's own footprints are easy to miss amid the chaos of life. When explorers saw the glittering digital maps of interconnected Maya cities glowing on their computer screens, it was as though the earth had momentarily lifted the hem of her green skirt. allowing us to glimpse the cities embroidered underneath. Perhaps elsewhere in forests still uncharted, more such patterns wait. The remains of peoples who mastered these ecosystems before retreating into legend. The jungle's silence is deceptive. Beneath every rustle is an old conversation, between rock and root, memory and decay. As our technologies grow keener, the veil will lift again and again, revealing that civilization's disappearance is not always destruction. Sometimes it is simply assimilation. Stone becoming tree, human order surrendering to the deeper architecture of nature, and history biding its time until light finds it once more. When the first beam of dawn slides between the stones of an ancient monument at a precise moment of the year, the past speaks. It speaks not in words, but in alignment, in geometry carved against the sky. Across centuries and continents, cultures separated by oceans seem to have drawn the same invisible lines, aiming their temples, pyramids, and standing stones toward moments when the heavens turn. Solstice sunrise, equinox sunset, the rising of a bright star signaling the flood season. These alignments repeat so often they form a pattern as global as the constellation map itself. Physics assures us that the stars are remote and unconnected. Yet human hands across millennia trace them as if they were intimate companions. At Giza, the Great Pyramid angles itself squarely to true north, the same preciseness later built into the Temple of Karnak, whose pillars channel midsummer sunlight along its central corridor. Thousands of miles away, at Machu Picchu, stone windows frame the same solar moment, the dawn of the June solstice, when the sun stands still and reverses course. In Britain, Stonehenge catches it. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat mirrors it. None of these builders shared a language, yet all obeyed the same celestial rhythm. The easy explanation is coincidence. The solstice and equinox mark transitions essential for any agrarian people, so similar observations would naturally arise. But this reasoning fails to account for the precision and range of angles, for the sophisticated grasp of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, encoded in some of these sites. To observe such cycles demands centuries of consistent measurement, records long predating written archives. It hints at continuity, a scientific tradition older than any surviving civilization, carried perhaps as myth, ritual, or inherited rule of thumb. Even navigation aligns with these patterns. Ancient mariners steered by Orion, by the Pleiades, by the slow circling of Polaris. The same constellations appear carved in petroglyphs from Australia to the Andes. The imagery shifts, birds, warriors, serpents, but the coordinates remain. Some hypothesize a prehistoric language of the sky, a system of orientation that spread with human migration, encoded not in words, but in architecture. Wherever those early voyagers settled, they anchored their communities to cosmic signposts, the ultimate form of keeping time when calendars did not yet exist. Alignment is both practical and symbolic. It threads survival with meaning. For the builders of Teotihuacan, whose vast avenue points not to true north but to the setting of the Pleiades, the orientation may have embodied a cosmology linking the stars with the renewal of life. For the people of Nabta Playa, deep in what is now Egypt's desert, stone circles marked the rising of Sirius, announcing the monsoon rains that carved ancient riverbeds. In each case, the act of positioning stone or temple tuned human life to the universe's metronome, a declaration that civilization existed not apart from nature, but within its pulse. Modern researchers using digital mapping have discovered clusters of sites across continents sharing identical angular relationships. If connected lines were drawn between them, the network resembles a woven grid across the planet's curve, as though builders referenced a global coordinate system before such a concept existed. Whether this pattern arises from coincidence, forgotten navigation, or something deeper remains open. Still, the fact that our ancestors spent so much effort adjusting stone to the exact turning of the sun suggests a unity of observation, a shared inheritance not of empire, but of awareness. When we stand in these places today, temples glowing briefly in the narrow light of sunrise, we participate in an ancient conversation. The stones do not move, the planet does. And because of that dance, each alignment repeats, reaffirming that our species has always looked outward to understand inward. These structures remind us that before we had compasses or equations, we had intuition reinforced by observation. The builders may be dust, but their knowledge endures in angles and shadows, in corridors of sunlight that know exactly when to return. Across museum glass and excavation reports hides a quiet defiance of chronology. A fragment of stone carved too cleanly, a borehole smooth as silk through granite. The faint echo of metalworking that supposedly shouldn't exist yet. These artifacts sit uneasily within our timeline, like puzzle pieces from a different box. They ask, in the calm voice of matter itself, whether civilization's progression has been as linear as we imagine. For every sequence of tool evolution we construct, wood to copper, bronze to iron, there appears some stubborn exception smoothing its curve into a circle. Stone is the most candid witness, because it keeps every touch. In Egypt's oldest ruins, channels run through diorite and basalt so precisely cut, they display spiral tool marks deeper than any bronze chisel could manage. Some are drilled straight through hard rock with cylindrical cores removed, as though the stone had been turned like wood on a lathe. Engineers today compare them to mechanical boring patterns, not the percussion strikes of hand tools. Explanations abound: sand slurry, copper tubes, tireless labor. But even confirmed archaeologists confess the craftsmanship feels out of proportion to its supposed technology. The difficulty is not that we lack imagination, but that the evidence insists on skill greater than conjecture. Across the ocean in Peru, the masonry of Cusco and Ollantaytambo continues the contradiction. Steps carved from single stones display facets meeting at flawless angles, surfaces polished enough to catch sunlight like glass. Each block differs yet interlocks perfectly with its neighbors, forming joints that hold through centuries of earthquakes without mortar. The technique remains elusive. There are no surviving marks of cutting, no chisels matching the curvature. When geologists test samples, they find edges where the crystalline structure of the rock seems lightly melted, as if heat had coaxed the stone to flow. No one can prove that such treatment was deliberate. But the suspicion shows how thin the boundary is between geology and forgotten engineering. Metallurgy tells a similar story. In Anatolia, in South America, isolated discoveries of nearly pure tin and complex bronze tools appear dated thousands of years earlier than coherent metallurgy should allow. Some ancient mirrors, cast of alloys of copper and arsenic, were polished to optical precision, bronze lenses that could magnify or start fire. Their creation required temperature control rivaling modern kilns. Each piece speaks of experimentation, guided not by accident, but understanding. Perhaps that understanding was passed along fragment by fragment, parent to apprentice, surviving catastrophe and migration like a hereditary spark. Even more mysterious are the traces of acoustics and vibration found in temple architecture. Certain chambers in the Great Pyramid resonate at frequencies that amplify chant, while monolithic stones at Sacsayhuaman and Karnak hum faintly when wind sweeps through their gaps. To the ancients, sound may have been more than communication. It was a tool, a shaping force. Experiments with harmonic vibration have shown that specific tones can lift fine particles, even small objects, by pressure alone. One begins to wonder whether the artisans who shaped stone so fluidly were not only sculptors, but musicians, orchestrating matter through resonance. Forensics can measure, photograph, and simulate, but it still cannot explain the artistic intelligence behind these anomalies. They whisper of knowledge cyclic rather than cumulative, arising, vanishing, and resurfacing according to the unpredictable tides of Earth itself. Civilizations perish, but ideas are buoyant. They drift across ages disguised as legend or ritual until rediscovered and renamed. When we handle such relics today, we are, in truth, touching the fingertips of minds that mastered subtleties beyond our memory. Their artisanship collapses the neat scaffolding of our historical scale, reminding us that intelligence does not care for chronology. It surfaces whenever curiosity finds the proper pressure, leaving behind tools that feel impossibly modern because the human instinct for creation has always been timeless. The polished stone, the melted edge, the core of rock smoother than any drill bit. All are signatures of an age unseen, whispering through the chisel marks that our ancestors may have known, and then forgotten, more than we dare to believe. High above the world, where the air itself turns solid and silence hums like a held breath, the planet keeps its diary. Layer by layer, snowfall compacts into annual pages of ice, each one trapping the minute traces of atmosphere that drifted down with it. Dust, pollen, volcanic ash, and whispers of gas. To scientists, those frozen bubbles are time capsules, perfectly preserved samples of what the world once exhaled. When drilled and extracted, they speak in chemistry, telling us of firestorms, cooling, and strange intervals when the air changed character as though something unseen had tampered with it. These cores, drawn from Greenland, Antarctica, and the ghost glaciers of Tibet, provide an unbroken record stretching hundreds of thousands of years backward. Within their milky translucence lie stories of meteoric impacts and massive eruptions, each marked by sudden spikes of sulfur and soot. Yet a few layers reveal signals that fit neither volcano nor comet. There are rises in carbon dioxide outside natural cycles, thin veils of heavy metals, even traces of radioactive isotopes formed without clear connection to known cosmic events. The anomalies appear like fingerprints lightly pressed into the planet's cold memory, inviting questions that make geologists uneasy. Could they reflect short-lived bursts of industry, the smoke of lost ingenuity long before ours? The idea sounds almost heretical, that intelligent hands may once have altered the air as we do now, only to disappear into extinction. Yet science demands listening to data even when it plots improbable stories. One sequence from Antarctic cores, roughly corresponding to the end of the Pleistocene, shows a narrow band rich in soot and black carbon, but poor in sulfur, inconsistent with volcanic origin. Its spread suggests hemispheric, not regional combustion, something burning everywhere at once. Perhaps vast wildfires. Perhaps the residue of the Younger Dryas catastrophe. Or, if imagination dares, the byproduct of something more deliberate. The planet's memory does not elaborate. It merely records. Deciphering these frozen signatures is an art of inference. The concentration of beryllium-10 reveals how much cosmic radiation struck the atmosphere. Ratios of nitrates hint at lightning or biomass burning. Trace metals might signal both meteor impact or smelting furnace. Thus, one cannot prove ancient technology by chemistry alone. Yet the very fact that ice preserves such nuances reminds us how little escapes the planet's accounting. If a civilization had produced smoke, forged metals, or released excess carbon, the evidence would survive somewhere beneath our feet. or under the polar glaciers waiting to be read. When researchers melt samples from deep time, they often describe a faint scent like ancient rain, the aroma of trapped storms from long before humanity walked upright. It is a humbling sensory bridge, evidence that air itself has lineage. Every breath mixes molecules that have been circulating since continents were whole, passing through lungs of dinosaurs, volcanic vents, and now, our own. The ice does not exaggerate. It simply testifies with patience, chronicling excess and balance alike. In those compressed veins glitter the records of all our mistakes, and perhaps those of predecessors long erased. To think of ice as an archive of civilization is to accept that human presence might not be unique in testing the planet's tolerance. Whether the strange spikes belong to natural cataclysm or forgotten industry matters less than what they reveal, Earth notices everything. Even after millennia of burial, it keeps the receipts of every careless fire. Someday, future beings may drill through the layers we now create, streaked with soot, plastic traces, and metallic dust, and wonder if they are reading the final chapter of some vanished people. The ice will tell them about us as clearly as it tells us about storms 200 millennia gone. It will whisper, in bubbles older than memory, that the Earth always remembers. It is we who forget. Every cell carries a whisper of history. Inside the spiraled architecture of DNA lies an unbroken thread, stretching not just through families or tribes, but through everything that has ever lived. When scientists began extracting genetic material from bones long buried in caves and tundra, they expected the lines to trace neatly back through known migrations, matching the map written in archaeology. Instead, the data poured out like an unexpected dialect, familiar words woven with accents no one had heard before. Across continents, ghost lineages surfaced, fragments of populations that rose and vanished, leaving only faint echoes inside our blood. Ancient DNA, sequenced from teeth or the dense petrous bones of the skull, reads like a palimpsest. Under the genetic handwriting of modern peoples linger older letters, crossed out but still legible. Some belong to groups who left no discernible fossils. Others reappear after thousands of years in places they ostensibly never reached. In Central Asia, an entire genome branch, long thought extinct, reemerges among isolated mountain communities. In the Amazon, fragments of DNA match the profile of Austral populations from across the Pacific, an impossible kinship by the logic of conventional migration routes. These findings do not rewrite prehistory at once, but they complicate it deliciously, revealing that humanity's journey was less a straight trail and more a braided river disappearing and returning through time. Each discovery begins humbly. A bone fragment, a tooth, a hair caught in ancient permafrost. Yet within those microscopic strands unfolds a travelogue stretching tens of millennia. Some lineages branch out from Africa earlier than expected, suggesting migrations that predate our known dispersals. Others show evidence of interbreeding with mysterious hominins only recently discovered, like the Denisovans, whose entire existence was inferred from a finger bone and a whisper of DNA extracted from a cave wall. Their genes linger in humans living today across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. The faint echo of a vanished people whose voices never reached history's page. What astonishes geneticists most is the reappearance of signatures where logic says they shouldn't be. Europe shows traces of ancestry linked to Siberia, older than the last ice age. Africa carries hints of archaic intermixing with branches that diverged long before Homo sapiens became a species. It's as if small populations spread knowledge and bloodlines far beyond their imagined range. Or perhaps as if ancient catastrophes erased them in one region only for their descendants to re-emerge elsewhere. carrying genetic embers of forgotten civilizations. The code itself seems to remember migrations long after memory fades. While genes cannot tell us of lost cities or languages, they reveal the symmetry of survival. After each climatic cataclysm, some remnant always endures, wandering to new lands, merging with others, rewriting both biology and story. Every extinction in culture leaves trace mutinies in DNA, adaptive traits for withstanding cold or digesting new foods, inherited immunities marking where pandemics once raged. The genetic map is not merely ancestry, it is a record of resilience, proof that intelligence flows like water, finding new paths when the old are dammed. Some researchers now speak of the ghost population problem, the statistical necessity of ancestors unseen. Their existence is inferred only because their genes appear as shadows inside ours, like a melody faintly audible though the instrument is missing. It suggests there were far more experiments in civilization than the fossil and artifact record shows, groups that thrived briefly, then dispersed until only their molecular footprints remained. We carry them unknowingly, thousands of generations later. Their stories confined to the double helix rather than carved in stone. When you look at the faces passing on any city street, the variety of eyes, hues, and gestures, you are seeing archaeology alive, the culmination of countless erasures and rebirths. Genetic science has made that invisible prehistory visible once again, showing that beneath our modern complexity lies a composited portrait of countless vanished kinships. The genetic puzzle does not promise simple answers. It teaches humility. The blood in our veins does not belong solely to us or even to the species we name ourselves. It is an archive of experiment and endurance, a record of civilizations that once touched the world, left no monuments, and yet continue to speak through the quiet language of our cells. Imagine, for a moment, that vast ages have passed since humanity vanished. Our towers gone to dust, our satellites reduced to cosmic grains drifting in the upper atmosphere. Our bones mixed into new strata that will one day harden into stone. What would remain of us recognizable to some future eyes? Would an observer millions of years from now, perhaps not even human, know that an intelligent civilization once bristled over these continents? This thought experiment became a scientific inquiry, bold in its simplicity. If an industrial species had flourished before us, could geology reveal it? The researchers who proposed it gave the question a name both whimsical and chilling, the Silurian hypothesis. The idea begins not with fantasy but with curiosity about detection. Industrial activity, after all, leaves chemical fingerprints, not just ruins. Plastics, metals, isotopes. The ghost chemistry of our civilization already seeps into soils and sediments. Certain polymers will take millions of years to break apart. Fertilizers alter the nitrogen balance of ocean life. Fossil fuel combustion increases atmospheric carbon in ways readable in future rock cores. But would these signs survive long enough and distinctly enough to betray the existence of a technological epoch hundreds of millions of years later? And if we find such anomalies in older layers, how would we know they weren't simply natural? Our own record hints at both hope and futility. In the coming geologic ages, cities will crumble, but their concrete will fuse into a new rock type scientists already nickname urbanite. Beneath that layer will lie a spike of unusual isotopes, plutonium, cesium, and carbon-14. Markers of nuclear power and atmospheric testing. A sudden bloom of synthetic polymers and heavy metals will distinguish our time as vividly as volcanic ash marks ancient eruptions. Now reverse the scenario. Look into deep time for similar anomalies that should not be there. In several epochs, scientists have found abrupt chemical shifts, enrichment of rare elements, spikes of carbon isotopes indicating massive combustion, even microspheres of melted minerals indistinguishable from industrial slag. These observations have official explanations: vast basaltic eruptions, asteroid impacts, natural coal fires. But each also fits what our industrial decay might look like after erosion's endless autopsy. The puzzle grows stranger the farther back we look. The Carboniferous period, 300 million years ago, shows deposits of unusual metallic concentrations coinciding with dramatic climate fluctuations and extinctions. It was an age rich in oxygen, when insects grew enormous and forests riotously spread. Conditions that could, in imagination, support sentient evolution. No trace of artifacts survive, of course. Yet the Silurian hypothesis asks us not to prove such civilizations existed, merely to test whether science could even recognize them if they had. Its sobering conclusion is that, given Earth's recycling nature, probability leans toward amnesia. Plate tectonics reuses crust like parchment, volcanoes rewrite layers, oceans dissolve all but the most stubborn clues. After a few million years, only subtle geochemical whispers would remain. That knowledge reshapes perspective. The absence of evidence may simply mean the planet has better housekeeping than we imagined. Perhaps advanced species have come and gone many times, their brief experiments erased by flood, fire, and subduction. Civilization, in this view, is less linear ascent than recurring fever, a way the biosphere occasionally tests its own complexity. Our existence might be just one of Earth's recurring symptoms. Even if we never uncover a fossilized microchip, the exercise sharpens awareness. We too are becoming geology, our atmosphere thickening with carbon signatures, our oceans laced with microscopic waste, our minerals rearranged into new alloys never seen before. Someday, someone, or something, may drill into the sediment and find a thin band of peculiar composition. They might name it after us, the brief anomaly of thinking matter, and wonder, as we do now about forgotten ages, who we were, what we dreamed, and how exactly we were lost. From time to time, the planet reminds us that its calm is only a curtain drawn across restless fire. Beneath the crust, pressure builds like a long-held breath until it releases with world-changing force. The most terrifying of these releases came nearly 75,000 years ago, when the supervolcano Toba, on the island of Sumatra, exploded with such power that the sound itself must have circled the globe. Ash rained across continents, day dimmed into permanent twilight, and the air filled with dust thick enough to silence birds mid-flight. Scientists estimate the eruption was thousands of times greater than any witnessed by civilization, an event that reshaped not just weather, but the future of humanity itself. Imagine the world as it would have seemed then. For months, perhaps years, the sky stayed the color of bruised slate. Sunlight weakened into a vague glow, plants yellowed, then withered. Entire food chains collapsed. Every breath felt heavy, lined with sulfur. Herds that had grazed across Asia wandered blind into drifting ash and never returned. Forests charred and came back only as ferns, those patient pioneers of devastation. The globe cooled by several degrees, enough to tip delicate climates into frost. Lakes froze where they had never known ice. Volcanic winter had arrived, and everything that relied on rhythm, migration, rain, growth, found its pattern broken. Genetic studies suggest that around the same time, humanity itself nearly vanished. Our species' ancestral population may have shrunk to only a few thousand souls after Toba's eruption, a near extinction preserved in the bottleneck of our DNA. It is easy to imagine them huddled near distant coastlines, feeding on what little the sea could still offer, watching the heavens remain stubbornly dark. What stories did those survivors tell to explain such wrath? Perhaps they spoke of angry gods or serpents of fire, tales later passed down through myth as memories half seen through smoke. Across traditions, themes appear again and again. Nights that lasted for years, suns swallowed by dragons, divine anger raining from the mountains, all in resonance with the echo of volcanic calamity. Toba was not alone in shaping narrative through destruction. Krakatoa erupted in 535 CE, so fierce that cities on the other side of the world recorded summers without warmth, harvests that failed, and skies stained red for years. The records describe famine, pestilence, and the feeling of apocalypse. In Iceland, Loki's eruption in the 18th century killed livestock, darkened Europe's skies, and likely influenced social unrest that would ignite revolutions. Each time Earth breathes fire, cultures interpret it with the vocabulary available to them. To some, it is punishment. To others, renewal. The line between Inferno and Genesis is painfully thin. Volcanoes create as much as they destroy. The soils of Java and Hawaii, born from molten birth, are among the most fertile on Earth. New islands rise from the sea, still steaming, blank slates for life to claim. The planet's interior, violent as it is, also keeps the surface alive, recycling carbon and minerals that feed ecosystems long after humanity forgets the cost. Our myths of death and rebirth, the phoenix, the purifying flame, the world reborn from ash, may come from this geological truth. Beneath fear lies recognition. What terrifies also nourishes. When we peer into cooled lava fields or gaze upon ash-buried cities like Pompeii, we are looking at moments when the boundary between myth and science dissolved. The gods venting their anger were really mountains clearing their throats. Yet the awe those eruptions continue to inspire reveals a deeper human instinct. To see intelligence in the planet's violence, to treat its convulsions as language rather than chaos. The fire from below speaks still, telling of the eons when Earth reset its stage with coughing flame. And our most ancient ancestors learned, beneath blackened skies, that survival sometimes meant worshiping the mountain until the light returned. The ground beneath our feet feels permanent, yet it is the most forgetful surface in the universe. It shifts in vast, slow currents, carrying continents like rafts on a molten sea. Every 200 million years or so, the seafloor remakes itself entirely, the old ocean crust sinking into trenches and melting back into the planet's secret heart. This restless motion, tectonic drift, is a quiet miracle and a quiet tragedy at once. It gives Earth its mountains, its magnetic field, its capacity for renewal. But in its endless renovation, it also destroys nearly everything that once rested upon its skin. Our world is a self-cleaning slate, rewriting its own history before anyone can read it twice. Imagine the process as patient violence. At subduction zones, one plate slides beneath another, dragging with it entire epochs. The fossils of creatures, the ruins of landscapes, whatever civilizations might have decorated a coastal edge. Within a few million years, those sediments are cooked and crystallized, erased beyond reconstruction. The planet is an artist constantly repriming its canvas. On Mars or the Moon, landscapes remain untouched for billions of years, bearing the scars of every meteor that ever fell. On Earth, the same meteor craters vanish into forest and ocean. Stability sacrifices memory. Movement ensures amnesia. Geologists call these vanished periods lost worlds, not because they housed known civilizations, but because even if they had, no trace could survive the recycling. The oldest oceanic crust remaining today is barely 180 million years old. anything older, is gone, consumed by trenches thousands of meters deep. If we look for the planet's true archives, we must turn not to the seafloor but to cratons, the ancient continental cores that escaped so many subductions. In those stubborn slabs of granite lie whispers older than bones, minerals that formed when the Earth's crust was still molten chaos. Yet even there, heat and pressure blur the writing until only hints remain, compressed into minerals like zircon that have seen the rise and fall of entire atmospheres. When you stand at the edge of a trench like the Mariana, peering into water that seems to fall endlessly, you are staring at the mouth of the Earth's forgetfulness. Down there, the crust curls and folds, its history crushed into new magma destined to rise elsewhere as volcanic arc. Out of obliteration comes creation. The same cycle that erases evidence also keeps the surface fertile. Continents drift apart only to collide again, raising mountains from the debris of their own destruction. The peaks we climb today were once seabeds, crowded with coral or perhaps cities we will never know. The Alps, the Andes, the Himalayas, all products of the recycling engine that prevents any long-term fossilization of civilization itself. This dance between permanence and oblivion forces humility. The planet we inhabit will outlive every monument we build, but will not keep them as souvenirs. It will fold our greatest works into metamorphic rock, melt them into basalt, scatter their memory as dust in volcanic ash clouds that seed new soils for future lives. To Earth, loss is not tragedy, it's maintenance. Humanity frets over forgotten tombs and vanished empires, while the planet quietly erases entire continents as part of its breathing. There's an odd comfort in that. The same mechanism that hides history also keeps the world alive, a paradoxical balance between decay and regeneration. Our species writes its story on a moving manuscript, the letters dissolving as fast as they form. Yet those dissolving lines feed the ink for tomorrow's words. The planet forgets itself, yes, but only so it can keep learning, evolving, and reimagining the face it shows the cosmos. In its forgetfulness lies a kind of wisdom, a recognition that to remain vibrant requires letting go of the past, even when that past includes us. The Earth has a heartbeat we cannot hear, but can see written across its stones. It pulses through magnetism, the invisible field that rises from the molten core and arcs outward into space, a shield against cosmic radiation and solar flares. This magnetic shell protects every living thing, yet it is not constant. It wobbles, weakens, and sometimes flips entirely. Over the long course of geological time, the North and South poles have exchanged places more than 100 times. Each reversal leaves its autograph in the crust. Bands of magnetized basalt on the seafloor that alternate direction like the stitching on a vast planetary tapestry. To the trained eye, they read like barcodes of the deep past, each line a record of orientation. Together, they form the most faithful timeline the planet has to offer. But those bands tell more than direction. They hint at turbulence. A magnetic reversal is not an instant switch, but a slow unspooling that can last thousands of years. During these transitions, the field weakens, sometimes to a fraction of its normal strength. Without that protection, solar and cosmic radiation thicken. The upper atmosphere sputters with auroral fire, and climate patterns twist unpredictably. Migratory animals that navigate by magnetic sense lose their map. Compasses spin aimlessly. The skies themselves burn green and red, even at the equator. Ancient curtains of plasma mistaken for omens. It is chaos in miniature, a quiet planetary seizure that reverberates through every ecosystem. Scientists have begun comparing these magnetic convulsions with layers of extinction and upheaval. In some epochs, the correlations align disturbingly well. Declines in species diversity, shifts in sediment chemistry, even abrupt changes in ocean circulation. Whether magnetism directly caused these disruptions or simply coincided with them is still debated, but the rhythm is unmistakable. When the planet rewires its poles, life shudders. Imagine what such instability would mean if civilization existed during one of those long geomagnetic wayward periods. Navigation failing, auroras turning night into fevered day, crops withering under altered radiation. Myths might remember it as divine punishment, lights of wrath in the heavens, while science would later translate it as core dynamics expressed in magnetism. Evidence suggests at least one major reversal occurred roughly 42,000 years ago, an event researchers call the Lachamp excursion. Tree rings from that period show spikes of carbon-14, indicators of heightened radiation reaching the surface. At the same time, cave paintings proliferate, as if humans sought refuge underground or turned to ritual communication with a cosmos suddenly unpredictable. It is not proof of cause and effect, but the synchronicity feels intimate. A world shimmering with ghostly color, people painting in torchlight, maybe telling stories about the sky that had lost its mind. The magnetic field is thus both shield and storyteller. Locked within cooled basalt, its alternating stripes allow scientists to chart not just where continents once lay, but how the planet's own heartbeat fluttered in and out of rhythm. These records connect to every reset we have discussed: volcanic winters, floods, vanished coasts, pinpoints along the same timeline of renewal. Magnetism may not dictate catastrophe, but it dances close enough to the chain reaction of geological change that life itself seems to sway with it. Perhaps civilizations older than ours perished in such intervals, their navigations collapsing, their climates spinning beyond adaptation. If their memory survived at all, it would come as sky myths, in stories of stars transformed or gods who reversed directions. Our instruments confirm what they could only feel. The Earth occasionally forgets which way is north. For us, still sheltered under a field growing weaker even now, the lesson is sharp. Every compass, every digital sensor, every migratory path ultimately depends on a phenomenon inside the planet that is as moody and changeable as weather. Should it falter again, our lights too may flicker beneath phantom auroras, and we will add our own stripe to the planet's magnetic cipher, a brief, shimmering signature in the ever-turning code of Earth. From time to time, the sky gifts us treasure wrapped in terror. Before iron smelted from the earth transformed tools and warfare, a rarer, purer kind arrived already forged, metal minted in the hearts of stars. When meteors fall, they scatter fragments of nickel-iron alloy unlike anything native to surface rock. To ancient peoples, these pieces were both divine and practical. Tough, shiny, strangely heavy. A shard fallen from the heavens carried the weight of myth. It was literally celestial matter too hard to explain and too precious to ignore. Every fragment represented a handshake with the cosmos, proof that the stars had touched the ground. Archaeologists first recognized this relationship in the most unlikely of places: a dagger buried beside an Egyptian boy king. Tutankhamun's blade, analyzed under X-ray fluorescence, revealed an alloy rich in nickel and cobalt, its crystalline structure unmistakably meteoritic. The composition was identical to known meteorites scattered across the deserts of Egypt, as if artisans had gathered fragments from small impact sites and hammered them cold into shapes of reverence. The blade shone not just as weapon, but as message. The ruler had authority not only under the sun, but from the heavens themselves. Elsewhere, the story repeats. Across the Arctic, Inuit legends tell of the stone that fell from the sky, a mass of cosmic iron that fed their tool-making for generations. They chipped it directly from meteorites, too massive to move, shaping knives and harpoons that sliced through ice and flesh alike. In the jungles of Central America, small iron beads predating local smelting appear in burial sites, their composition again tracing back to meteoric origins. Each instance implies not luck, but understanding, a recognition that these strange materials were gifts to be harvested. What's remarkable is that across continents, cultures treated celestial metal with the same blend of practicality and awe. It was neither purely religious nor entirely utilitarian, but a fusion of both, the earliest union of science and wonder. To work meteorite iron required knowledge not easily guessed. The metal was extremely hard. Ordinary stone hammers would shatter before shaping it. Artisans learned to heat it gently in coals and strike when it began to glow, but not too hot, lest it crumbled. They discovered nickel's resistance to rust centuries before chemistry gave it a name. Such findings suggest experimentation, guided by tradition, as though metallurgists inherited recipes whispered from even older hands. Perhaps somewhere in deep prehistory, after witnessing a brilliant fall of fire from the heavens, a group of survivors gathered the glowing fragments and learned that the sky could provide what Earth withheld. That memory, retold across millennia, might explain why the earliest smiths looked upward for metal before digging downward for ore. Modern science adds its poetry to the tale. The isotopic signatures inside these meteors link to stars older than our solar system itself. Remnants of supernova whose explosions seeded the galaxy with heavy elements. Every piece of cosmic iron thus carries a universal pedigree. Atoms that have journeyed for billions of years before embedding in our soil. When ancient peoples shaped these fragments into knives, jewelry, or ceremonial symbols, they unknowingly worked with material born long before Earth existed. Without microscopes or equations, they still sensed the truth, that the line between heaven and ground was not a boundary, but a conversation. Even now, meteorites continue to fall, maintaining this correspondence. Collectors and scientists recover them with gloved hands, testing their alloys, weighing their message. Each small piece is assurance that our world is not isolated, but continually receiving whispers from beyond its atmosphere. The ancients saw fire streak through the dark and took it as communion. We see the same and call it data. Yet the astonishment is identical. The celestial and the human remain intertwined, hammered together like nickel and iron in the cosmic forge. To hold such metal even today is to feel continuity, a reminder that the first technology humanity ever shaped may have arrived already half-made, fallen from the stars, carrying in its cool weight a memory of creation itself. For as long as stories have been told, they have carried the memory of water rising. Every culture, from mountaintop villages to desert kingdoms, recalls an age when the sea advanced and the world seemed to dissolve. We call these tales myths. Noah's Ark, Deucalion's ship, the sinking of Dwarka, the deluge of Gilgamesh. But their persistence points toward a common seed, a memory of the oceans reclaiming the land at the end of the last ice age. Between 15 and 7,000 years ago, the planet warmed, glaciers collapsed, and global sea levels rose more than 100 meters, drowning vast tracts of coastal plains. For those who lived there, it must have felt like divine punishment, sudden and absolute. Climatologists reconstruct this transformation with the cold precision of data. Ice cores reveal steep jumps in temperature. Sediment cores taken from submerged continental shelves show clean transitions from terrestrial plants to marine life. River valleys, now hundreds of meters underwater, trace ancient networks of human settlement. Shorelines we inhabit today are young, the newest in a series of ever-changing boundaries. But to late Ice Age people, hunters, fishers, and early farmers, the change would have been incomprehensible in scope. Entire habitats vanished, taking with them sources of food, shelter, and meaning. The edge of every map they knew literally moved beneath their feet. Archaeology and myth intersect here in uncanny ways. Along the Indian coast lie submerged ruins near modern Dwarka and the Gulf of Cambay, their foundations smothered beneath silt, aligned in patterns suggestive of streets. In the Persian Gulf, sonar reveals a dried river system once feeding a lush basin long thought barren. It matches descriptions from Sumerian texts of a fertile land where creation began, later said to have been swallowed by flood. From the Doggerland Plain of northern Europe to Sunda's drowned lands between Thailand and Indonesia, evidence repeats shallow seas covering what were once thriving valleys. Everywhere the same story, preserved first in geology, then in language, and finally in legend. Oral traditions add emotion to the data. Australian Aboriginal peoples tell of coastlines that once extended far out to sea, recounting, in song, journeys now underwater. These stories, confirmed by modern oceanography, have been passed down unbroken for over 10 millennia. Timescales once thought impossible for oral memory. In the Americas, tribes speak of the great rising salt water that forced migrations inland. The Bible and the Epic of Gilgamesh may therefore be literary descendants of a trauma far older than writing itself. When read this way, the continuity of flood narratives becomes not coincidence, but testimony. What we call myth may be the human nervous system of the planet, its capacity for memory stretched across generations. Those who fled the rising coasts became bearers of both story and warning, encoding survival lessons in religious terms to ensure they would be repeated. The gods grew angry, they said. What they meant was that the climate shifted. The world was cleansed by water, meaning the glaciers melted and the seas returned for their due. In understanding this, the myths lose none of their magic. They gain depth. The deluge is both literal and symbolic, a moment when humanity learned that stability is temporary. The same event that erased landscapes also scattered people outward, mixing ideas and genes, initiating migrations that birthed new cultures. Without those floods, civilization itself might have taken another path entirely. The rising waters shaped not only our continents, but our consciousness, instilling a collective respect for the power that hovers in the background of every generation's comfort. When we listen to the flood stories with science in one ear and myth in the other, they sound less like cautionary fables and more like eyewitness reports written in the emotional language of survival. The ancient world truly drowned, and its survivors have been singing about it ever since. Across the pages of the world's oldest writings, bright machines drift like mirages. In India's Sanskrit epics, the skies are filled with vimanas, flying palaces powered by light, sometimes described with an engineer's precision, sometimes with the awe of poetry. The Hebrew prophet Ezekiel speaks of wheels within wheels descending in flame. The Greeks told of sun chariots, fiery orbs steered by gods whose recklessness could scorch the earth. The Dogon of West Africa recall beings who came in ships that thundered. Whether ancient metaphors or echoes of real experience, these stories persist with uncanny thematic unity. Light, motion, energy, sound, and a sense of beings or technologies descending from above. When we first read them, The easiest interpretation is spiritual. Ancient chroniclers used the vocabulary they had. What looked like a divine carriage to them might have been anything luminous or overwhelming. Yet beneath that symbolism lies an almost technical curiosity. The Mahabharata mentions engines humming, weapons emitting radiant heat, and machines that move by their own force. Babylonian cylinder seals show disc-like forms streaking between stars. Across continents, myth paints similar images of flight, noise, and thunder, as if humanity in its dawn was remembering something only half understood. Before concluding these were aircraft or visitors, we can view them through the lens of psychological and natural phenomena. Volcanic eruptions, meteor showers, and auroras could all inspire such imagery, their brilliance too vast for ancient explanation. But there is another possibility, that some early cultures experimented with forms of energy now either forgotten or disguised in sacred metaphor. Electricity itself existed billions of years before living things ever used it. Lightning and magnetism were free for the observing. Certain stones produced sparks when struck. Electric fish shocked riverside hunters. To harness any of these forces, even crudely, would have seemed supernatural to witnesses without context. A polished copper sphere connected to a galvanic cell might glow faintly or hum. Could the chariot of fire or wheel of light refer to such marvels, passed down as legends after the devices themselves corroded back to ore? Archaeological whispers support the intrigue. The Baghdad Battery, a clay jar with copper and iron innards dating back 2 millennia, could generate voltage enough to electroplate gold. In Dendera's temple reliefs, figures raise objects shaped uncannily like bulbs, joined to serpentine cables. Mainstream interpretations call them symbols of fertility or mythic serpents. But the resemblance to electrical imagery is haunting. In South America and Mesopotamia alike, carvings depict figures holding rods or tines that could as easily conduct as command. Perhaps these were ceremonial echoes of lost utilities, their meanings preserved after their mechanisms were forgotten. Sound, too, may hide behind the mythic idea of flight and power. Many ancient structures resonate at frequencies that can move dust or water, natural byproducts of specific architectural ratios. We have explored how stone may have been shaped as though softened. Perhaps harmonics played some part. A building that could hum, a chamber that vibrated. It isn't difficult to imagine those vibrations elevated into stories of engines and aerial magic. To ancients who equated sound with spirit, resonance itself would be divine technology. Over centuries, the memory of acoustics could transform into tales of propulsion, the hum of ancient power turned literal in song. In treating these myths not as nonsense, but as cultural fossils, we find an elegant tension between imagination and experience. Whether gods descending in light or ancient experiments with energy, the stories retain the same human core, an encounter with forces greater than understanding. Symbols of flight remind us that progress is cyclical. Our machines today are tomorrow's myths. Perhaps one day, when our satellites are dusted over and our engines rust into legend, future storytellers will describe a time when people rode in shining orbs that circled the world. They will mean us, and like our ancestors, they will be correct in spirit, if not in every detail. Sound surrounds us, yet remains invisible, shaping the world in ways often unnoticed. It passes through flesh and stone alike, turning air into a sculptor's tool. Long before microphones or amplifiers, ancient builders seemed to understand that vibration could speak a language of its own. Their temples, chambers, and monoliths are not silent. When the right note is sung or drummed within them, The walls hum like living creatures, harmonizing as though remembering a forgotten instruction. Modern acoustic archaeologists, armed with sensitive microphones and patience, are discovering that many sacred sites behave not merely as architecture, but as instruments carefully tuned to the human body. Step inside the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta, a subterranean temple older than the pyramids. Its central chamber rings naturally at about 110 hertz, a tone deep enough to vibrate the chest cavity and distort perception. When chant fills the air there, voices merge, seeming to emanate from every direction at once. Visitors report sensations of floating, of time slowing, even of mild trance. It is easy to imagine the builders recognizing this physical alchemy and using it to reach the border between matter and spirit. The chamber functions as both resonator and teacher, proving that long before modern physics, people knew sound as power. The pattern repeats globally. Within Peru's megalithic walls, narrow niches produce resonances, matching low vocal ranges. In the Great Pyramid's granite king's chamber, certain tones set the stone blocks to faint vibration under electronic measurement. At Chichen Itza, a handclap from the base of the stairway returns as an echo mimicking the call of the sacred Quetzal bird. Such precision cannot be coincidence. Whether created for ritual or for engineering, the acoustic design suggests deliberate study of how sound interacts with shape. Science confirms what intuition already suspected. Frequencies affect matter. Grains of sand on vibrating metal plates form stars and spirals under different tones. Engineers call the phenomenon cymatics, but to ancient priests it must have felt like revelation. A vibrating floor could shift loose dust into patterns resembling the cosmos. What better metaphor for creation? By shaping their spaces to amplify certain harmonics, temple architects might have sought to mirror nature's frequencies. The resonant heartbeat of the world communicated through stone. To worship was to tune oneself to the universe's pitch. Then there are more sobering theories. That acoustic knowledge served not only the spirit, but the builder's hand. Experiments show that intense vibration can reduce friction, making heavy objects easier to move. A low, sustained note might cause boulders to quake slightly, breaking contact with the ground. Tibetan monks, legends claim, used horns and chant to lift stones along mountainsides. Modern physics does not forbid this. It only lacks empirical proof. Even if the lore exaggerates, some early use of sonic leverage could explain feats of construction otherwise dependent on supernatural strength. The whispering walls of temples may therefore preserve blueprints, not metaphors. A manual of physics disguised in ritual. Sound heals too. Frequencies around 60 to 130 hertz stimulate bodily resonance, influencing circulation and mood. Perhaps chanting congregations discovered this long before medicine measured it. The temple's tones could soothe, unify, align heartbeat and breath. They were laboratories of empathy, where vibration translated isolation into belonging. To stand among echoing stones is still to feel that ancestral synchronization, the pulse of collective frequency linking ancient and modern throats in one note. Every vibration leaves a signature, rippling outward until absorbed by silence. The stones continue to echo faintly, sharing that signature across ages. Whether meant for worship, healing, or impossible engineering. The builders wrote their knowledge in resonance rather than text. Each hum within those walls is a syllable in Earth's oldest language, a reminder that sound, like memory, never truly dies. It only fades beneath the threshold till the next curious ear leans close and listens. Every few centuries, the planet reminds us that it is not as stable as it pretends. Beneath the calm of blue oceans and familiar constellations, the Earth tilts, wobbles, and rolls on its axis with unpredictable grace. To those living through mild versions of this motion, the change feels like seasons and storms. But there are times in the geological record when the shifts appear frighteningly fast, as though the entire crust moved in a sudden convulsion, dragging continents into new latitudes while oceans heaved in disoriented fury. These moments, frozen in the alignment of magnetic minerals, read like scars of an Earth caught mid-revolution, a planet briefly uncertain which direction was home. Scientists studying magnetized rocks have discovered that certain layers point far away from the poles that should have existed when the rock solidified. The explanation, still debated, may lie in localized rotation of the outer crust relative to the mantle. Whatever the mechanism, the evidence paints a portrait of rapid reorientation, enough to shuffle climates like cards in a new deck. Regions once tropical calcified under ice, while polar lands thawed into forest. To any civilization unlucky enough to endure such transition, it would have seemed like the gods themselves had tipped the world. Imagine a temple city built near what was once the equator. Its observatories track the sun's ritual climb precisely, its architects confident that the heavens will never break pattern. Then, over generations, perhaps within living memory, the angle of dawn shifts, winters lengthen, and crops wither. Star charts lose validity as familiar constellations drift out of season. Rivers alter course, animal paths vanish. For people whose calendars ruled their survival, this was cosmic betrayal. Myths of the world turned upside down, found in both South American and Arctic traditions, may be fragments of remembrance from that time. In the Andes, ancient carving shows llamas and tropical birds side by side with penguins. In Siberia, mammoths are frozen in postures of sudden panic, bellies still full of warm weather plants. The planet's tilt could truly have made summers into ice overnight. When we look at the geological archives, the hints align with tales of sudden catastrophe. Pollen records show entire forest types replaced within decades, while coral growth bands reveal lost centuries of warmth replaced by glacial chill. Such speed defies our sense of tectonic time. If crustal shifts did occur, they would be nature's most disorienting trick, moving continents faster than cultural memory could adapt. Mountains would drown, deserts would green, civilizations fixated on celestial navigation would find their compasses lying. It is no surprise that early storytellers translated this bewilderment into divine drama. In Egypt, the Benben stone was said to rise where the first light returned after a global darkness. The Mayan Popol Vuh describes the world spinning until gods anchored it anew. Indigenous Arctic accounts tell of the sun refusing to set for days. Across the globe, our ancestors recorded confusion with celestial rhythm, each witness interpreting through the lens of faith what may have been the tangible convulsion of their planet. But such motion, terrifying though it is, belongs to Earth's self-correction. The planet constantly redistributes weight. Ice accumulates, drags the poles slightly one way. Melting shifts them back. Even today, satellites measure slow wanderings of the axis, a drift intensified by climate change. If geologic instability once disrupted ancient cultures, its echo continues quietly beneath our feet. Should another sudden displacement occur, our infrastructure, railways aligned by latitude, global positioning built on skies presumed permanent, would stumble the same way as ancient star temples did. In the end, we follow those magnetic breadcrumbs not out of fear, but fascination. They show that our planet behaves like a living organism seeking equilibrium, shedding and renewing balance with each convulsion. The shells of ammonites, the frozen dust of mammoths, the angled crystals in hardened lava, all bear witness to times when north became south and the map of the world remade itself. And perhaps, embedded in myths of celestial upheaval, our distant ancestors left us both a warning and a reassurance. The earth forgets, yet always finds its rhythm again, even after it has turned itself inside out. Hidden beneath the thick jungles and high mountains of South America are stories that shimmer with metal. In the Andean highlands and the Amazon's edge, legends speak of golden tunnels stretching for leagues underground, passages luminous in darkness, guarded by serpent motifs and echoes of forgotten hymns. Local lore calls them the work of gods or visitors who descended from the heavens and then retreated beneath the earth. Explorers from the 16th century onward repeated these tales with the fervor of treasure hunters. But within the myths there lingers something older than greed. A memory of engineering, of light gleaming where no sun can reach. The first explorers who heard of the Tayos caves in Ecuador or the paths of Viracocha in Peru believed they were listening to directions toward lost gold. Native guides spoke instead of corridors polished smooth as glass, veins of metal that glowed faintly by their own power. At first glance, these might seem mere exaggerations or allegories. Yet nature herself is capable of inspiring such reverence. Lava tubes, long solidified rivers of molten rock, do form near-perfect tunnels winding beneath volcanic terrain. Layers of reflective minerals, pyrite, mica, native gold, can glint like distant lamps in the beam of a torch. The earth creates illusions potent enough to birth legends. What once dazzled wanderers underground might have become oral scripture by dawn. Still, natural beauty alone rarely earns divinity. What makes these myths remarkable is how often gold, light, and teaching intertwine. In Inca tradition, the first culture-bearers emerged from caves near Lake Titicaca, carrying rods and ornaments that blazed with solar brilliance. Across the continent, Muisca stories speak of golden priests descending into sacred lagoons to commune with the gods. Such imagery may encode technological memory. Fire contained without flame, light pure but not consuming. To people who smelted gold yet never used it for practical tools, only for symbols of worship, perhaps their reverence recalled masters who once worked metals for other reasons, purposes now obscured by collapse. What had once been a forge became a shrine. What was once industry turned into ceremony. Archaeology offers fragments that deepen the intrigue. At Cusco, narrow stone corridors run under the old city, their walls fused as though by heat hotter than the sun. In Colombia, artifacts known as quimbaya, golden airplanes, mimic aerodynamic shapes, wings and rudders crafted centuries before flight. They may simply portray insects or birds stylized into charm, or they may point to a forgotten fascination with form that suggests more than ornament. Even if these pieces have mundane explanations, the consistency of theme, subterranean brilliance, divine metal, knowledge from below, feels like cultural memory condensed into iconography. Perhaps these legends endure because they describe not literal machines, but the first encounters with refined ore and smelting furnaces glowing in caverns, the discovery of technology itself. Gold's resistance to decay must have reinforced its divine reputation. While iron rusts and copper fades, gold neither tarnishes nor weeps green tears. It survives unblemished in tombs and riverbeds, gleaming as it did thousands of years prior. Civilizations watching every other material crumble naturally linked such permanence to the eternal. To possess gold was to hold a fragment of immortality, to handle the same substance found in the stars. if underground there existed veins that pulsed with such material? Could it not be the very blood of gods? The alchemy of awe became theology. Perhaps the gods of metal were not celestial beings at all, but the first engineers, miners, metallurgists, early scientists who understood the language of fire and stone better than their peers. Their furnaces lit the darkness, their tunnels echoed with the song of smelted ore. And when their age ended, myth took their place. The memories survived as stories of shining teachers who vanished into the underworld, leaving their laboratories behind to become cathedrals of stone. Whether natural or built, the golden tunnels endure as reminders that devotion and technology often share the same spark. A fascination with light breaking through darkness. Time is our one inescapable current. Yet ancient civilizations found ways to measure its invisible motion with almost supernatural finesse. The Maya tracked the heavens with mathematics so refined that their predictions of solar eclipses rival modern computations. The Egyptians not only mapped the lunar cycles but aligned their festival calendars to the heliacal rising of Sirius, the signal for the Nile's flood, with a precision deviating less than a day across millennia. In Babylon, astronomer priests charted planets through centuries of records, discovering patterns that would not be formally described again until Kepler's laws. All of these achievements emerged early and seemingly mature, as though their foundations were not invented from scratch, but remembered. The mystery deepens when we realize how long such accuracy demands observation. To detect precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, requires data spanning thousands of years. To align temples toward solstitial dawns that shift minutely each century calls for inherited corrections, the kind that only a continuous watch on the horizon could provide. Archaeology shows no break large enough to justify a complete rediscovery, yet the arithmetic of these calendars suggests exactly that sort of perfection built on forgotten scaffolds. Somewhere in prehistory, it seems, humanity began counting long before history learned to write. Each culture encoded its measurements differently. The Babylonians divided circles into 360 degrees and time into hours, minutes, and seconds, numbers still governing modern clocks. The Egyptians used a 365-day solar calendar, yet spoke of older reckonings of 360 days with additional epagomenal intervals, as if remembering an older system needing correction. The Maya combined a 260-day ritual count with a 365-day solar one, interlocking them into a 52-year cycle of renewal. Beneath their ornate glyphs lay statistical mastery. They calculated the synodic periods of Venus and Mars to fractions of a day. Scholars marvel at how they achieved such precision without telescopes. But perhaps the answer lies in generational continuity. Observatories served not by instruments of glass, but by human patience, where the sky itself was the archive. Yet there is another possibility, whispered on the edge of speculation, that these calculations inherited data from a civilization erased by the catastrophes of Ice Age's end, a people who had centuries to study the stars before their coastal observatories drowned. Fragments of their knowledge might have survived as oral pattern, handed to flood refugees who rebuilt along new rivers. The earliest calendars would thus be restorations, not inventions, a collective memory of timekeeping rescued from oblivion. We may never know, but each measurement that appears too wise for its era seems to gesture backward toward teachers unnamed. Whatever their origin, these calendars did more than count days. They defined meaning. For the Maya, time was a living organism, each cycle a heartbeat in the cosmos. The Egyptians saw calendars as instruments of harmony anchoring heaven and earth. The Babylonians used them for prediction, not just astronomy, but fate itself, setting the stage for astrology's future. Modern science often separates mysticism from measurement. Yet in those ancient observatories, the two were united. Observation was worship. Precision, a sacred duty. What strikes us most is their stability. Our modern leap years, atomic adjustments, and recalibrations remind us how messy timekeeping can be. But many ancient systems stayed accurate for centuries without reform. They balanced solar and lunar rhythms with elegant mathematical interlocks, suggesting a long empirical apprenticeship. Such mastery implies an unbroken lineage stretching beyond the limits of current evidence. Perhaps time, sensed so carefully by these ancient mathematicians, doesn't merely flow forward. It loops subtly, carrying seeds of past knowledge into new ages. The precision of old calendars may be less an anomaly and more a sign of memory enduring through disaster, a clock still ticking beneath civilization's resets. Their stones and glyphs whisper the same quiet truth. To know the future, one must have remembered the sky for a very long time. Catastrophes seize our imagination because they are dramatic. The roar of volcanoes, the flood swallowing a coastline, the comet striking from nowhere. But most of civilization's extinctions arrive quietly. They creep through minds rather than mountains. A society need not burn to fall. It can simply forget. The science of forgetting, though less spectacular, is far more pervasive. Knowledge, like any organized system, obeys the laws of entropy. Left unattended, it disperses, fragments, and vanishes within a handful of generations, leaving behind monuments whose meaning survives only as rumor. History offers endless case studies of this gentle undoing. After the fall of Rome, aqueducts dried, engineering turned ghostly, and literacy fled from cities into monastic gardens. Within a century, people stared at the ruins of arenas and thought them giants' palaces. In the Maya lowlands, the collapse of centralized kingdoms led not to extermination, but to memory loss. Communities lived among their ancestors' pyramids without knowing why they were built. Languages that once filled libraries collapsed into dialects scratched onto bark. Nothing supernatural in the decline, only the slow leakage of skill as generations grew up with more pressing concerns than preserving the abstract beauty of calculation or masonry. Knowledge is precarious because it lives in connection, not just in artifacts. A book is only a fossil. Without readers who grasp its grammar, it's paper sediment. Skills require apprentices. Formulas need teachers to translate symbols into meaning. When trade routes break and wealth dries up, so does intellectual surplus. A culture that must spend every sunrise on survival loses patience for astronomy by nightfall. Over time, even myths degrade, their sharp observations dulled into superstition. What begins as science recited in poetry ends as ritual repeated without purpose. Archaeologists can almost watch forgetting happen in the material record. The quality of ceramics or metalwork in long civilizations often wanes before political collapse sets in. Decorative motifs simplify first. Craftsmen mimic patterns they no longer fully understand. Architectural precision fades, corners drift out of alignment, measurements lose their sacred ratios. Nothing catastrophic, merely incremental corrosion of mastery. Entropy leaves fingerprints subtle but relentless, erasing complexity one workshop at a time. Modern psychology mirrors this pattern inside the brain. Memory requires rehearsal. Synapses strengthen only through use. A neural network left inactive prunes itself, conserving energy. Cultures act the same way. When curiosity wanes, when education becomes ceremony rather than exploration, the cognitive web of society thins. We forget the why and keep only the how until even the how feels optional. Civilizations decay from the center outward because attention, our collective electricity, dims. Ironically, prosperity accelerates amnesia. When tools work automatically, fewer people remember their underlying principles. Digital algorithms decide our routes, our words, our markets. Yet most could not rebuild them if they vanished. The more efficient a system becomes, the fewer participants it needs who truly comprehend it. In that shrinking circle of understanding lies a familiar vulnerability, the same fragility that once reduced stonemasons' dynasties to legend. If a modern disruption severed electricity or data for a generation, our own experts might stare at the bones of servers and wonder what rites these great machines performed. But forgetting is not only loss, it is also how the earth resets its mind. Out of cultural amnesia grows possibility, blank canvas for rediscovery. Each renaissance begins with reawakening curiosity about ruins grown silent. Perhaps memory must crumble to make all possible again. Still, the pattern invites humility. We are not guaranteed to keep what we know. We only rent it moment by moment, through study, conversation, and wonder. The science of forgetting is thus the story of humanity itself, the ceaseless battle against the natural pull of ignorance and comfort. Every equation, every carved symbol, every spoken question is an act of resistance against entropy. We forget because we rest. We remember when we reach forward again. Progress is nothing more than our refusal to be completely erased. Every generation believes it stands at the summit of understanding. Yet history shows that knowledge has a habit of arriving disguised as heresy. When something new is dug from the ground or dredged from obscurity, the first reaction is rarely wonder. It is disbelief, sometimes even contempt. The cycle is almost comforting in its repetition. Discovery, ridicule, acceptance, then reverence. The rediscovery of the past follows this pattern like a drumbeat, reminding us that resistance to new truth is as human as curiosity itself. In the 19th century, a self-taught enthusiast named Heinrich Schliemann chased the myth of Troy. Scholars of the time considered Homer's epics poetic fictions, not travel guides. Yet Schliemann's trowel uncovered the walls of a city that matched the bard's verses as if myth had conspired with fact. Instead of celebration, academia offered skepticism. The artifacts, they insisted, must have been misinterpreted, his translations faulty. Only decades later, when further excavations confirmed multiple layers of ancient fortifications, did Troy step from legend into archaeology. Pride, not evidence, had been the initial obstacle. The same hesitation met Göbekli Tepe. High on a plateau in southern Turkey, stone circles older than agriculture itself lay buried for 12,000 years. When the first carved pillars emerged in the 1990s, they upended everything thought settled about civilization's timeline. How could hunter-gatherers sculpt and organize on such a monumental scale before villages, before farming, before pottery? The site suggested that spirituality and art did not grow out of cities, but preceded them, that religion may have founded civilization rather than the reverse. At first, many dismissed the idea as impossible, assuming misdatings or freakish anomaly. Only painstaking stratigraphy and years of repetition finally forced consensus to shift. Once again, the past had proven larger than our imagination would allow. These are not isolated embarrassments, but the texture of progress. Human knowledge expands not by steady ascent, but by a pattern of resistance followed by reluctant surrender. We shape our worldviews carefully, guard them as property, and fear the chaos of revision. A discovery that contradicts the expected threatens entire structures of career and identity. So skeptics fight, not always for truth, but for the continuity of their peace. History's great advances often begin as trespass. Copernicus moving the Earth from the center of creation. Galileo insisting moons could orbit something other than humanity's ego. Champollion deciphering hieroglyphs that revived an Egypt too intelligent for Victorian fantasies of linear progress. The resistance is never merely academic. It lives in all of us. Faced with the unfamiliar, we seek comfort in dismissal. Every museum artifact once doubted reminds us how fragile certainty is. Even now, new findings, fossils older than expected, cave paintings redefining symbolic thought, stone tools found where no humans were supposed to walk, still trigger the familiar sequence of denial turned acceptance. We forget that science itself depends on surprise, that its strength lies in its capacity to outgrow its own prejudices. Rediscovery demands humility, and humility is painful. To admit that we have misread the past means admitting the limits of our vision. Yet that humility is also liberation. Each correction enlarges the field of possibility, reminding us that wonder never truly leaves. It merely waits for permission to re-enter the conversation. When we re-evaluate the forgotten or accept what once seemed mad, we practice the oldest intelligence of all, the courage to change our minds. Looking back, the real miracle is not that buried truths resurface, but that we keep finding them at all. Against the inertia of skepticism, against institutional pride, curiosity endures. Somewhere, even now, a discovery lies beneath soil or sea, quietly enduring our disbelief. One day it will rise, as Troy and Göbekli Tepe did, to gently undo another certainty. And we will realize again that history's greatest revelation is always our capacity to be wrong, and to begin again, a little wiser for the resistance that tried to stop us. The bones of vanished cities litter the earth like punctuation marks in a long conversation between humanity and nature. Each ruin whispers the same refrain. We forget what sustains us. Behind every fallen empire lies an ecological signature. Deforestation, soil exhaustion, rivers strangled by diversion, civilizations rarely die of invasion alone. They wither from within, victims of their own success. Yet, in examining this repetition, we find not just warning, but instruction. The morale is written clearly if we are willing to read it. The world is not something to conquer, but an agreement we must constantly renew. The Sumerians built their greatness upon irrigation. They coaxed the desert into harvest, tracing canals across the plains of Mesopotamia. At first, the system performed miracles. Grain overflowed, cities expanded, temples rose. But each irrigation left salt shimmering in the soil. Within centuries, farmlands turned pale and sterile. Populations fled north to fresher water, leaving behind temples half buried in dust. The same rivers that nourished their beginning engineered their forgetting. Rome cut down its forests to feed furnaces and navies, eroding the very hills that anchored its prosperity. The Maya, in their exuberance, over-tilled limestone terrain until drought and famine drove their people into smaller enclaves. History's ruins seldom crumble from war alone. They crumble from imbalance, from the quiet rebellion of the ecosystems pressed too far. For every collapse, there was also a moment of choice, a signal ignored. Tree rings and ice cores reveal floods, and droughts announce themselves decades in advance. Water tables fell, seasons warped, yet rituals stayed rigid, politics tighter, as though humanity could command the climate by decree. Cultures wrote prayers to rain gods, when what they needed were changes in practice. The tragic symmetry is that progress blinds as much as it enlightens. The more control we gain, the less we notice the subtle warnings of dependence. But these ruins also remind us of endurance. After cities fell, the soil healed. Forests returned to the ridges of Central America. Grasses conquered the marble of the Parthenon. Nature does not seek revenge, it simply resumes. To her, civilization is weather, brief but influential. Each collapse returns nutrients to the cycle, clearing ground for what comes next. The resilience of the planet dwarfs our anxiety about permanence, and that resilience should humble us. We can destroy a habitat, but not the principle of renewal. The Earth has been ending worlds for eons and beginning them again with patient indifference. When we frame lost civilizations as failures, we miss the quieter lesson that their mistakes are blueprints of possibility. They show us how flexible human beings can be once reality strips away pretense. After the Maya droughts came renewed attention to local rainfall and forest guardianship. After Rome's fall came monasteries preserving seeds and knowledge for a humbler age. Renewal does not require optimism, only recognition that continuity is crafted from adaptation. In our own century, the patterns reappear, so familiar they ache. Forests vanish for speed, seas rise for comfort, and our networks of convenience resemble the old canals of Sumer, productive yet corrosive. We call our systems sustainable, but the word itself carries a hint of panic, an acknowledgement that we know the contract is fraying. Perhaps the first step toward redemption is to absorb the oldest wisdom written in stone, that luxury without stewardship is only a prelude. Civilization is not destiny. It is a truce between our ambitions and the planet's patience. Those who came before us remind us that the truce must be renewed continuously, through humility, curiosity, and restraint. Every ruin, weathered and silent, stands not as monument to failure, but as tutor. It says quietly, "Remember me," but more importantly, remember what I forgot. The past is often treated as a museum, but it behaves more like a mirror. Every time we peer into it, we catch our own reflection flickering through the dust. When we study the fall of cities swallowed by tide or farmers ruined by the weather they thought they had tamed. It is not nostalgia that stares back. It's premonition. The story of lost civilizations is less about their endings than about cycles that have never stopped. The deep inhale and exhale of a planet correcting its imbalances. Archaeology, viewed through that lens, becomes prophecy written in bone and brick. It whispers to us that what has been forgotten always returns if the lesson goes unlearned. Modern science, with all its precision and satellites, now records the same warnings that ancient priests once read in the stars or the river's color. Ice cores show the concentration of carbon in the air climbing faster than at any time since glaciers last gripped the continents. Temperatures mimic those that preceded the great floods, marking the boundary between myth and memory. Storms grow stronger, glaciers surrender invisibly, and oceans expand into cities built in stubborn defiance of height and tide. When Masidor, we compare these graphs to the geological layers of disaster, the shapes align disturbingly well. The past is playing back its greatest hits, only accelerated. We can almost hear echoes of those earlier civilizations that watched sky and water turn against them. The Mesopotamians, whose clay tablets recorded erratic weather before their collapse. The Maya, carving desperate rain rituals into limestone. The Norse settlers in Greenland, who built wooden churches while the ice thickened outside. They all believed themselves immune to decline because their technology or faith seemed unmatched. Their downfall was not ignorance of change, but arrogance against it. We too have our temples, of glass and data, and we kneel daily before them on bright screens, certain that insight alone can substitute for adaptation. The earth is not malevolent, it is cyclical. Its resets are not punishments, but consequences. When rainforests become fields, oceans become sewage, and skies gather unfamiliar heat, feedback begins. The same physics that drowned ancient coastal villages now drives rising seas against our ports. The same chemistry that starved Sumer's wheat now threatens our crops through drought and salinity. The difference is only scale, and our illusion that we, wielding technology, are separate from the pattern rather than part of it. Archaeologists have long noted how resilience follows humility. Cultures that adapted survived. The Andean farmers who learned to terrace steep mountains instead of raising them. The Pacific Islanders who migrated along seasonal winds instead of defying them. They lived in dialogue with nature, not in command of it. The proof of their endurance lies in their descendants, who still whisper the names of storms before they arrive. If there is a prophecy here, it is simple. The planet cannot be defied indefinitely. The longer a species confuses its appetite with dominion, the sharper the correction will be. Yet this mirror also shows potential. Unlike Sumer or Rome, humanity now holds a shared awareness of planetary cause and effect. Never before has a civilization known precisely how it endangers itself in real time. The question is whether knowing is enough to change behavior. The same instruments that measure our crisis could, if wielded with empathy, guide us through it. We could choose cooperation over conquest, stewardship over spectacle, recognizing that continuity depends not on strength but on symbiosis. The mirror does not threaten, it reflects. Every flood myth, every field of buried walls, every fossilized lament is a version of our future offered for reconsideration. The Earth's rhythm persists with or without us, but it prefers dialogue to apology. If we remember our place in that rhythm, we become not the next layer of sediment, but its storytellers, singing in tune once again with the planet that teaches through repetition. Night falls quietly on our long journey, and at last the stars are allowed to speak. They glow above us, patient and ancient, older than every ruin we have explored, older even than the questions themselves. Under such a sky, the debates over evidence and interpretation soften. The need to prove gives way to the need to understand. Whether the lost civilizations were vast empires built in forgotten ages or symbolic mirrors of humanity's potential, their meaning outlives their stones. What matters is not the precision of our timelines, but the humility they inspire. Each buried city, each myth half-proven, is a reminder that memory is delicate, and that forgetting comes easily to those who mistake knowledge for permanence. When we look upon collapsed temples or read myths etched into clay, we are not only observing ghosts of architecture, but the continuity of consciousness itself. Civilizations rise like waves, bright, cresting, full of shiny confidence, and then curl back into the deep. What endures is not the brick or geometry, but the impulse to build, to ask, to record. Even the act of speculation, our wondering about what was lost, is part of that chain of remembrance. In that sense, the greatest monument humankind has ever constructed is not physical at all. It is curiosity, the unbroken will to reach backward for meaning while moving forward into uncertainty. The Earth, meanwhile, remains the patient archivist. She keeps her logs in layered rocks, in isotopes sealed within ice, in the whispers of magnetic minerals and the steady pulse of tree rings. Our task has never been to control that archive, but to interpret it with reverence, understanding that what we read there are instructions written to ourselves. Every ruin says it plainly. Balance must be renewed, resilience learned, pride tempered. Those who ignored that script were erased, not maliciously but naturally, their overreach folded into stone and silt. Yet within their remnants grows our ability to see warning as wisdom. Their errors have become our textbooks, their silence a language that rewards close listening. We live in the brief moment between remembering and forgetting, in a civilization powerful enough to map galaxies, yet fragile enough to lose its own history to distraction. The older truths ask nothing grand of us, only attention. To walk amidst ruins or to study myth is not escapism. It is calibration, reminding us how small we are within the immensity of time. There should be relief in that smallness, because it means the responsibility of remembrance belongs to everyone, not just scholars or dreamers. Every story retold, every curiosity preserved against cynicism, strengthens the bridge between worlds that would otherwise drift apart. Knowledge does not need eternity to matter. It needs stewardship. To pass something intact to the next hands, even a single idea carried through tides of change, is to defy forgetting. Perhaps that is what the ancients meant when they built toward the stars, an understanding that memory isn't stored in stone, but in intention, that each generation must rebuild its own beacon of understanding. We may never know whether Atlantis stood, or whether the first engineer truly raised gold-lit tunnels in jungle rock. Yet as long as we continue to seek them, they live, reshaped into metaphors that remind us to stay awake within creation's dream. Above us, the sky remains. It has watched ice ages come and kingdoms go, and still it glows with impartial grace. In that glow lies the real inheritance of all lost civilizations, the passage of wonder, the reverent awareness that knowledge is both fragile and luminous. The earth, ever our teacher, invites us to remember not for proof, but for perspective. And so we end where the first storytellers began, beneath the same quiet stars, honoring the mystery of what was, what is, and what, if we are wise, will endure.